Hi, everybody. My name's Derek, for those who don't know me, and we are on with Dave Merner from Saanich-Sooke area, Green Party leadership candidate. And it's 6:30 now, so we are ready to go. And without further ado, I will just let Dave introduce himself before we start asking some questions.
Thanks a lot, Derek. It's really great to be with you all. I'm coming to you from Squamish.
Oh, sorry.
Start again?
All right, I said that. No. I just said the wrong name.
No, that's good. No, not at all. Really good to see everybody. And I'm coming to you from Squamish, the traditional territory of the Squamish First Nations. I'm in my daughter's bedroom here. She lives here, and we're on a cross British Columbia tour. Tomorrow it's Kamloops. The next day it's Kelowna, and we're going all around back to Vancouver Island and then down through the island. So we're on our BC tour. I've crossed Canada twice on this leadership campaign, and it's just been fantastic. I'm going to do a very brief introduction, introduce my vision for Canada, my vision for the Green Party, and then talk a little bit about what I have to offer to Greens in Nanaimo, Ladysmith, and beyond. So it's really nice to see Elon here and Lynn, and also my mom and dad, Bob and Darlene Merner. Really great to have you all on. I'll start by a quick overview of my vision of Canada. I'd love to see a Canada that's a leader again internationally. We used to be a leader. We used to be seen as a leader by other nations. And if Canada was able to become a leader again, especially in the transition from fossil fuel to renewable resources, I think we could make a huge contribution to our planet. And the science is clear. We have maybe 5, 6, 7 years until climate change is irreversible. And we need Canada to be a leader globally in order to reverse that trend. And I'm very convinced that unless we put more Green members of Parliament into the House of Commons to hold the government to account, that's just not going to happen. And so I'm really focused on winning seats, not just winning seats for the sake of the Green Party, winning seats in the House of Commons, but because we need to change the course of our country, and that will enable us to change the course of our planet. And organization on the ground to me is critical. We need 338 ridings that are competent. As I said earlier, I've crossed the country twice, and my guess is we have about 15 to 20 ridings that are actually competent, that have a chief executive officer, a chief financial officer, people who are actually organizing meetings and able to organize on the ground. The other part of my vision for the Green Party, in addition to being organized across Canada, is for us to figure out how we connect up with movement politics in a more systematic way. We're not bad at connecting with, the Friday Climate Strikers and Extinction Rebellion and the Sierra Clubs of Canada, but we need to go beyond that. We need to connect up with Black Lives Matter and Wet'suwet'en and Strong and Idle No More and these other social justice movements. And I think we have huge potential to do that. We need to compete with the NDP there. And I think we can compete and win. And if the Green Party of Canada became sort of the cutting edge, the political cutting edge of this movement politics, we could really transform not just the Green Party, but transform Canadian politics. So I'm really keen on building that and working together on that. The last thing I'll say is here's what I have to offer. For one thing, it looked like we're down to 2 folks from Nanaimo, but both of you know, I believe, I'm the only one who came and knocked on doors for Paul Manley in his by-election campaign, which he won. It was a key breakthrough for the Green Party on the island. And I think it matters who shows up and who does the work. And I would love to recruit both of you guys in helping me win the leadership. Because there's only 2 of us on with my mom. I could actually talk it this way. I normally wouldn't.
Hey, Dave, just so you know, the way we normally do this is the link. We had a little bit of a technical, we should have warned you, but we normally give the link for YouTube to the general participants. And so the people that you're seeing on the Zoom chat here are probably just the people that you've given the link to.
Oh, I see. So, yeah. So that's very helpful. So there's a cast of thousands watching us. Is that what you're saying, Derek?
Hundreds of thousands, right? They're all over YouTube. Yeah. Just so you
Okay,
know.
that's good. They're all on YouTube rather than on Zoom. Okay, I
That's
get
right.
that. That's awesome. Well, thank you. So I'll be a little more discreet in what I say, but I do think it matters who's shown up, who's knocked on doors. Like we brought whole crews of people up in my old van, my 8-seater van, for about 6 or 7 weekends before the election day weekend, and then we had a whole huge crew there for about 4 days before the by-election win. And that was one sweet victory party that we had before the by-election, or on the by-election evening, election day evening. And so I think that's important. Secondly, it's important to have a leader who actually has campaigned for the Green Party, campaigned from Atlantic Canada to British Columbia on winning Green campaigns, federally, provincially, and municipally. I'm the only person in the race who has that experience. The other thing that I offer that's unusual is that I can actually win in the riding I ran in 2019. None of the other candidates can actually win in the riding. They ran in 2019, and about half of the candidates didn't run at all in 2019. So I think it's important if we elect a leader who can't win in a riding where they have a realistic prospect of winning the riding, then we're creating a problem for ourselves, a problem that needs to be solved. Last thing I'll say is that it is essential to have a totally bilingual leader ready to go on day one. Je suis capable, dès la première journée, de faire campagne en anglais et en français, de gagner des débats d'échecs, de cogner aux portes et convaincre les gens de voter vert. Et je pense que c'est essentiel d'avoir un leader qui est parfaitement bilingue. If we don't choose a leader who's perfectly bilingual, then we really throw away our opportunities in Quebec, and there are very significant opportunities for victory there. And also in New Brunswick. And in fact, I think New Brunswick might even be the best place where we will break through next. We broke through with Jenica Atwin last time, and there are 2 or 3, maybe even 4 ridings in New Brunswick that we should be turning green. But it's essential to have a leader who is perfectly comfortable campaigning in English and French in New Brunswick for us to win those seats. And I believe that in terms of that ability, I'm the only one who's campaigned in New Brunswick. We campaigned for Megan Mitten. She won by 11 votes. And every volunteer who went and knocked on doors for her can claim some sort of credit for that. And that was a fantastic campaign. And it's because we had a totally bilingual team of door knockers, and we outworked the other side, the Liberals. And that's why we won. So that's what I offer. Deep experience in campaigning. I actually really love campaigning. Deep experience in the Green Party. I'm the only candidate in this race who's been a critic in Elizabeth May's shadow cabinet in 2 portfolios, as justice critic and as democratic reform critic. I understand the Green Party in my bones. I ran in 2019. We came a close second, and next time we're going to win in Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke. And I hope that you fire away with your questions. There's no unfair question. Just go for it. I'm looking forward to the questions and answers and comments because that's the best part of these calls. So thank you, everybody. Over to you, Derek.
Okay, great intro. Yeah, I actually went out and knocked doors with David at a couple points there. He's a lot of fun at a door. Does a lot of listening, a lot of talking. Have a great time with the guy. So we'll just jump straight to the first question that we've got here. It's about the Canadian. I always forget the acronym here, so this is embarrassing that I'm not sure if I've memorized it right, but the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB. So CERB has been a critical emergency measure to help Canadians weather the COVID-19 pandemic, but some say it has disincentivized low-income Canadians from going back to work. So how do you see a guaranteed livable income being different? How would you implement a GLI in order to ensure that it's not a disincentive to work? And what do you see the main benefits of a GLI being, sort of?
I think that the GLI should be a key part of our campaign next time. And just before I answer that in more detail, Derek, I'm just wondering about the question here about the soundtrack, whether people are still having trouble hearing us.
Yeah, so it seems that someone was having an issue with that on YouTube as well, but it's gone away. So
okay, perfect. That's really great. Thank you.
If it comes back, someone will chime in and I'll stop you.
Awesome. That's really great. So back to the GLI. I really see the GLI as a critical plank in our platform in the next election. I think we should put it right up there with obviously a climate action plan, first of all, GLI, maybe second or third, and then democratic reform as second or third priorities for us, moving to proportional representation. And GLI is so important because there are going to be literally millions of Canadians who are cut off help. They'll be unemployed. And with our economy recovering slowly, they're going to need help. And if we had brought in a guaranteed livable income in the same model that we campaigned on as Greens in 2019, at the very start of this pandemic, we'd be much further ahead. It would have been cheaper than the CERB. It would have been one single program. It wouldn't have been a multiple mishmash of programs that were put together sort of day after day as Trudeau walked out to the microphone to explain the latest little addition to CERB. And it would have been more fair. Everybody would have got it. And then what happens is those who aren't eligible are taxed back. Really simple program, one administration, much less red tape. And the biggest thing, I think, is that Canadians wouldn't be left in the lurch when CERB is cut off. The question also asked about the employment effects. Will people just stay at home, and rather than treating the guaranteed livable income as sort of a safety net, they would treat it as a hammock. They just hang out at home, resting on the guaranteed livable income, and and the conservatives always say it, drinking beer and smoking cigarettes and all this kind of stuff. The conservatives say. And my view is there's no data to support that. There have been recent studies of the United States equivalent to the guaranteed livable income through the pandemic, Yale and Harvard studies and University of Chicago studies too, which say there's no employment impact. People are looking for jobs still. In fact, one of the very few things that Trump has said that's true recently is that employment has really grown in the last 2 or 3 months in the United States. People are not staying on their benefits. They want to get back into the workforce. Finland just did a study. They're coming out with their academic reports on a huge guaranteed livable income study over 2 years, massive project. And it said the same thing. People want to get into work. And what the guaranteed livable income has done in Finland is it has given people a chance to stabilize their lives, find accommodation, and then do a job search. And you can buy the clothes you need or the equipment you need to get back into the workforce. So the academic studies are clear. Unfortunately, we have to be able to explain this in a way that doesn't make everybody glaze over. We have to be able to tell the story of how we are building a safety net, which will let people get back into work. And if we can tell that story more briefly than I just told this story, and in a compelling way, I think this will be a really powerful part of our platform in the next federal election.
Very cool. Very comprehensive.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. People like to work. It makes us happy, and people. I don't know if anyone spent a significant amount of time unemployed, but it can lead to depression pretty quick without having some sort of focus.
Yeah. And even in this pandemic, I mean, people have been off work in this pandemic, and I've been traveling across the country. And what we're doing is holding public events in public parks. And people are so excited to get out and to see people again and to talk. And that's what work provides. It provides a space to meet with people, to contribute in a meaningful way to our society. And I think people are really looking to get back to work. And I totally agree with you, Derek. This has huge impacts in terms of mental health and stress and so on when you're off work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next question we got is about drugs. Might sound like Portugal here, but your stance on drug prohibition. So do you support decriminalizing or legalizing drugs in Canada? And what approach would you support in general, and why?
I would support entirely legalizing drugs, ensuring that they're in the hands of the health practitioners, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, pharmacists. Take them out of the hands of the criminals, put them in the hands of the professional healthcare providers. I would follow specifically the Portugal model. They've cracked the code on how to address this terrible impact of the opioid crisis. British Columbians know this. I'm from Vancouver Island. Dr. Bonnie Henry has written the definitive report on this. More British Columbians are dying every day from the opioid crisis than they are from the pandemic. It's terrible. All we're lacking is political will. Horgan and Trudeau have really dropped the ball on transforming how we manage drugs in Canada. We should treat them as a health issue, not as a criminal justice issue. I worked for 28 years in the justice system, and everybody in the justice system knows, anybody who studied any of this knows, we have to decriminalize. No, sorry. we have to legalize drugs. And it started with marijuana, good for the liberals for doing that, but we need to go much, much further and take all drugs out of the hands of criminal gangs and put them into the hands of the healthcare providers. Portugal's done it. There are good examples also in Switzerland and in the Netherlands. Let's follow the leaders, because Canada has been really slow in following best practice in this area. And in the criminal justice system, it's terrible. We have a revolving door of people who are addicted, who should never be in a prison. They should be in a health facility. And I personally feel very strongly about this. And obviously, Green Party members set policy, but as leader, I'll be pushing very hard for a full legalization policy and following Portugal. Thanks for the question.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of people I'm sure can relate to this. A lot of people have been hit really hard by the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
Paul himself talks about it a fair amount. He had a
it's a terrible tragedy. Yeah, it really is a terrible tragedy.
Well, it's unnecessary deaths. You know, people
Yeah.
are having a rough time, and it's easy to fall into pits like that. And
Yeah,
if you're
Yeah.
criminalized at the same time, yeah. So
Yeah.
the next question we've got here is about continual growth and the growth model. So there's been a critique by many in the renewable energy crowd been a critique by many that the renewable energy crowd wants to continue the perpetual growth model, just to change it to a sort of green growth, as if you can greenwash the growth idea. So do you think we should have economic growth as the main goal for our economy, or should we be looking at a steady state economy or even planned degrowth?
Yeah, we should be definitely shifting off the sort of traditional capitalist constant growth model and onto a well-being model. Other countries are doing this. New Zealand just issued earlier this year a well-being budget. And it's not about pushing up GDP all the time. It's about measuring citizens' well-being and focusing on what leads to well-being. And I'm not an eco-socialist or a socialist, but I really respect the analysis of the eco-socialists and socialists in this race who say it's not possible to have constant growth capitalism when you live on a finite planet. To me, that just makes sense. And so what we need to do is shift away from measuring the success of our economy and measuring sort of the performance of our government by how much gross domestic product has grown. It should all be about well-being. And there were very clear measures on well-being. It relates to one of the questions we were asked just earlier on, what are addiction rates? What's happening to poverty levels? What are the homelessness rates in our country? There's very good ways of measuring well-being, and that's what we should be focusing on, is increasing well-being and not pushing up GDP all the time, which is just not sustainable. One of our 6 core values in the Greens has always been sustainability, and our current capitalist model does not address that core value, so we need to shift the model.
Absolutely. A lot of models for it. Somebody mentioned donut economics to me a while ago. Really interesting. Yeah, you can be very, very happy without
Judy Green, who just joined my campaign 2 days ago, always campaigns on donut economics. If she was in a leader's campaign still, she would talk to you all about donut economics and explain it. And that is right. We need to change how we look at our economy, and it needs to be much more about sustainability and well-being, and not about constant growth.
Yeah. We actually just had Judy on, and I'm fairly certain that she did mention that. Alicia was the one interviewing her, so I don't remember. But
yeah.
Okay, so the next question we've got here is about Indigenous rights. So some Indigenous groups in Canada have been on the front lines of resisting fossil fuel development, while some others have embraced it and have even partnered with fossil fuel corporations or want to buy into big projects. So what should the Green Party of Canada's approach be in regards to respecting Indigenous sovereignty when some nations and groups decide to invest in LNG, oil sands development, or pipelines, and maybe some don't?
I really appreciate the question, because one of the reasons I went into law as a young man was because I believe that deep injustices have been done to Indigenous people throughout our history, and they continue to be done. And I felt that by learning, how to litigate and how to pass legislation, I could maybe make a small difference in terms of reversing this terrible history of oppression and discrimination towards Indigenous people in Canada. And I'm really glad that the Green Party makes this a priority. And actually this week, we'll be rolling out an Indigenous policy You can keep an eye out on davidmerner.com for that new policy that's rolling out, including creating Indigenous advisory circle for the leader of the Green Party. I'm rolling it out into my own campaigns, so I walk the talk in my campaign. And then I'd like, if I become leader, to make it a permanent part of an advisory system, a circle of Indigenous elders and wise people who provide direct advice to the leader, so that we always make sure that what we do passes through an Indigenous lens. There's a saying in Indigenous communities, nothing about us without us. And if I'm the leader, I'm going to make sure that we live up to that principle. To the question specifically, I have a story for you. It's a story Adam Molson tells. And he says he has cousins along the track of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And when the Kinder Morgan people were negotiating with First Nations, they would go into a community and offer huge dollars to the chiefs and band counselors and so on. And one of them called him up and said, cousin, we got this huge offer from the Kinder Morgan people in Texas. What should we do? And Adam says, well, you know, this will be a disaster for the planet. It's not sustainable. There's risk to the waters and lands on your First Nation territory. And you should really know the risks. And his cousin says to him, yeah, we've thought about all that, but we're going to go along with the deal anyway, we think, because we know that the folks in Burnaby and our cousins, the First Nations in North Vancouver, are going to be able to stop this anyway through the protests and blowing up the lines. And it's never going to happen. So we're going to take the money and we're going to go and help our cousins out down the line to make sure it never gets through. And they did. They took the money. So many First Nations have taken the money. And it's true. The questioner is right. People are thinking, First Nations are thinking of investing in this terrible project. And I think that would be just sort of a repetition of the colonialism that has really marked how our federal government has worked with First Nations. I think it's totally irresponsible to sell this pipeline. No one in the private sector is prepared to buy it, right? They can't find a buyer now. So instead, what the Trudeau government is doing is trying to convince First Nations to buy it. It's a total outrage. And the subsidies to make this work, right now, people don't know this, but we're subsidizing as taxpayers to the tune of $300 million a year, just the operating costs. It's a money-losing proposition right now. And that's not even counting the 14, 15, some people say $20 billion it's going to cost to twin that pipeline. So it's a total financial disaster. And I hope that the federal government is stopped from basically bringing in First Nations into such a money-losing proposition. It would be really terrible if that was the outcome of all this, when the private sector has clearly walked away from it. Kinder Morgan walked away, and no one is prepared to invest in it. And it's true of the tar sands as well. People are walking away from there. Total is out of the tar sands. The Koch brothers are out of the tar sands. The Norwegian Wealth Fund has said, we're not investing in fossil fuels anymore. The big investors are getting out. And for the First Nations to get in now, it would be just an outrage, I think, and a terrible mistake. Of course, we have to respect First Nations self-government, First Nations' right to make these decisions. But boy, I sure hope they don't make a huge mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, they have every right to make that decision, I guess is the bottom line, right? And
yeah,
backed into a corner, a lot of them in a lot of these cases. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the next question we've got here is about Canada's deficit. So about balanced budgets and such. So due to the pandemic, Canada's deficit has been growing. Is this a big problem in your view? Some people think that Canada will have no choice but to introduce austerity measures. And do you think that we need to, or can Canada actually come out of the pandemic without bringing in cuts to programs?
I do. I think that Canada has a long way to go before we have to start worrying about debt and deficits. And one of the reasons is that Canada has been relatively responsible over the years in terms of our debt to gross domestic product ratio. So we have lots of room to run up debt. And in the last election, the Greens campaigned in 2019, we campaigned on getting back to balanced budget in about 5 years. We've always been responsible and careful about how we spend taxpayer money. We've always costed out our promises, and we've had huge, way more progressive spending promises than the NDP. We've been much, much more ambitious in our spending in terms of guaranteed livable income, free tuition for trade school, college, and university, national pharmacare. The NDP have joined us on that one finally. I mean, we are way more ahead of the NDP on the social justice agenda, but we've also been really clear on where the revenues are coming from. And in 2019, we said revenues and expenses will balance in 5 years. And we had a carefully costed plan. We sent it to the parliamentary budget officer, which the NDP, of course, have never done. And by the way, the Conservatives haven't done that either. And I think that was very responsible. But now we're in a totally different world. And I think we'll have to have a conversation in the shadow cabinet on this, and also among Green Party members around what's realistic now. Off the top of my head, I would say that a balanced budget target in 10 years maybe is maybe 15 years is a reasonable target. And I don't think we should compromise on our social justice program because Canada can afford it. And our dollar hasn't dropped since we've spent these millions and millions of dollars, rightly so, on Canada Emergency Response Benefit and other social justice programs in the last 6 months since March. So I think we should keep along this track. We do have to, I think, keep an eye on when will revenues and expenses balance, what is the right kind of timeline, but this is no time for austerity, and we don't need that kind of an agenda, I think, in the Green Party.
Yeah, it's interesting you say our dollar hasn't dropped. Somebody else brought up a point that even though we're spending all this money, every other country in the world kind of is in the same boat. So
yeah. That's
maybe
exactly right.
I mean, sounds like money's made up to me, if every dollar is losing battle simultaneously. I mean,
I think it's a lot of is about comparing ourselves to other countries and looking at what they're doing. And so long as compared to other countries, we're being responsible, we're spending in a wise way. We're especially spending, I believe, on human capital. I love our guaranteed livable income and our free tuition promises. They're very expensive, but we know how we're going to pay for them. And what that does is it builds up human capital. And that's a fantastic investment in Canada. That gets us into being competitive in the global economy. And it also really helps, especially with the poorest Canadians. For 7% of our 2019 budget, we would have eliminated poverty in Canada by bringing in the guaranteed livable income. It's a fantastic deal. And we should sell that to Canadians. Imagine getting rid of poverty in Canada for 7% of our 2019 budget. It's worth it over and over again. And if you factor in the impact of it on our health system and on our justice system, the reduced costs over time, the huge potential for young people to grow and prosper and live healthy, safe lives, it's a great deal. And we should really be pushing hard on our social justice agenda in the next election.
Very cool. Yeah, I totally agree. So the next question we got here, in the wake of the death of George Floyd, international protests have called for defunding of the police to address systemic racism and police brutality in general. However, the term defunding the police means different things to a lot of different people. So do you support the idea of defunding the police in some capacity? And if so, what exactly would you be calling for as the leader of the Green Party of Canada?
This is going to surprise everyone. I worked in the justice system for 28 years as a lawyer working on justice transformation. I worked the last 10, 12 years in Victoria here on taking lawyers and judges entirely out of our civil justice system with motor vehicle accidents and condominium strata disputes and small claims disputes. And people were flying in from Australia, Singapore, the United Kingdom, US states to see how did BC crack the code on justice transformation when the justice system is so conservative, so resistant to change. And so I'm very, very interested in this idea of racism, systematic racism in the police. And I would say it's much broader than that. It's throughout our justice system. If you look at the number of Indigenous people, the proportion of Indigenous people who are in Canadian prisons, and you compare it, say, to the proportion of Indigenous people who work in our legal professions, it's completely disproportionate. And racism is not just shot through our police services. It's deeply entrenched in our entire justice system. And I worked on that, on changing that, and we made some success in BC. Coming directly to the question of defunding the police, believe it or not, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, folks at home can Google this, have pretty much said we should be defunding the police. What they're saying is, and police officers I speak with all say this, they should not be in the business of frontline social services. And there are no social services out there, except in a few special examples, that enable the police to step back and step away and be the first ones to say.
Oh, sorry, Dave. It looks like you're just cutting out a little bit here. About halfway when you were talking about police. Oh, your video is completely frozen.
Can you hear me now?
I wonder if somebody just walked in and took up your Wi-Fi here because your connection has gotten quite spotty.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, and your video's
Yeah.
off. Yeah.
Okay, why don't I turn off the video because that reduces the Wi-Fi consumption. And I'm in Squamish, and as some of you know, rural British Columbia doesn't always have the best internet connection. But as long as you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll try coming back on a little later if that's okay with you, Derek.
Yeah, that's totally fine. You're about where you were saying you were talking about how there's I forgot what the organization was you said, but the organization of police talking about how they need social services to be the frontline responders. Cops aren't trained for those kinds of things.
Yeah. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, the CACP, Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, is saying they should be out of the social services business, and they're doing too much of that. And I've worked very closely in Victoria with the ACT teams, ACT, Assertive Community Treatment Teams. And what they do is they have nurses, social workers, psychologists working together with one police officer who backs them up. And that's only for situations where violence is imminent, somebody is waving a gun or a knife around. And those ACT teams go out and they have relationships with people who are struggling with mental health on the streets, in social housing. They know the folks in those places. They talk to them every day. They work with them closely. And the police officers way in the background. And what happens is the social workers and the psychologists build up relationships with folks, and you don't need police intervention. And I think that police officers are the first ones saying, we've got to get out of the business of trying to do social work because we are totally ineffective. Not just that, we're counterproductive. When people see us show up in a uniform, they don't trust us, they don't like us, and especially people who are going through withdrawal or who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they have a violent reaction often. So I'm a total fan of shifting responsibilities. The problem we have in Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and across our country is that we are not properly funding the social services, the frontline social services, to enable the police to get out of this business. And so I think we need to work very closely with the idea of investing in those frontline psychological social work services and getting the police entirely out of that business, except as a backup in rare situations. So the police officer is never the first one to knock on the door when somebody's going through withdrawal or having some sort of episode related to drugs or alcohol. So that's my answer. And you can see that it works in Victoria with these assertive community treatment teams.
That's a really, assertive community treatment teams. That's very cool. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's a model for British Columbia. And just before I retired from the Ministry of Attorney General, we were looking into how we could scale this up. Also using technology. The justice system is really way far behind in terms of using even the telephone, let alone smartphones and computers, in terms of getting the right people into the right places to provide the right services. And police are almost never the right service. So,
yeah. I can personally relate to that. I had at one point there was a person who was very clearly mentally ill and had wandered his way onto the property that I'm living on, and I didn't know who to call to give him some help because he seemed like he had gotten out of some sort of mental health care institution. And so I called the non-emergency line thinking that some plainclothes person would show up and talk through him, but a cop showed up and that made him uneasy, and it escalated the situation. Honestly,
exactly.
It was, I suppose I could have called the hospital, but
yeah, well, the police know this too, right? They know it's better if a health professional shows up and is the first point of contact, especially somebody who might actually know the person. That makes a huge difference. And it's the same question, it's the same answer as the earlier question about legalization of drugs. We need to get people into the hands of the right service providers. And right now, that's just not happening in our justice system or our health system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a few questions from the chat here. One popped up while we were speaking about the debt or the growth-based economy. I can't remember which question, but Jim from the chat is asking, do you see us attaining sustainability without significant cost to standard of living? It's a tough question.
It is a tough question, and I have to confess that my training is in law and government, and so I'm not an economist, and so I'm going to give you an answer which I believe to be true, but it's one of those things where we would really need to look at what are the experts saying. I'm a true believer in evidence-based politics. I do not believe that we should be driving our politics through an ideology. There are a couple of ideological candidates in the race, or through identity. There are 3 or 4 identity candidates in the race. What I think we should be doing in the Green Party, and I really am proud of the Green Party for doing this, is looking at what does the evidence say? And when you ask a question about what will happen in the future, it's tough because you're asking what will the evidence be in the future? So I'm struggling with this question, but my short answer is my sense is that there is a huge amount of work to transition off this fossil fuel economy to move into an economy that's driven by renewable energy. And if we can invest as taxpayers and as a government in this big transition, if we can create the largest job creation project in Canadian history, bigger than the Transcontinental Railway, and say, we're going to build an east, west, north electrical grid. We're going to connect up the provinces, Quebec Hydro and Ontario Hydro, BC's hydropower to Alberta. We're going to build the largest electrical grid powered by renewable energy in the world. And we're also going to include rural internet, high-speed internet connectivity in that work. We'll transform our economy. It's going to take a massive transformation, but who's to say that when you make that transformation, when we're off fossil fuels, we can't actually continue to grow in a much healthier way? I don't know the answer on that. It's a really tough thing to predict, but I do believe we can make this transition now, and we have to make this transition now in order to show avoid an imminent climate disaster. And so in the short term, I think the answer is clearly yes. We need the biggest job creation project in Canadian history. I'm going to just get off my video so you can keep hearing me. We need the biggest job
we didn't
creation
lose too
project.
much.
Great, that's great. We need this project to make the transition. We need this project to show the world that it's possible for the 4th largest exporter of fossil fuels, that's Canada, in the world, for the country that subsidizes fossil fuels more than any other country in the G7, that's Canada, that we can lead the way in transforming our economy. And that's going to require growth in the short term, because to do this is going to be a massive public investment. So the answer is, in the short term, I believe the answer is yes, we will need to continue to grow, but we have to grow in the right direction. And then in the long term, once we're into this new steady state, it could well be possible to say, we are going to manage down this constant growth problem we have. And we're going to get away from the traditional capitalist ideology around constant growth. And we're going to focus on well-being and wellness. And we can do that because we have a new infrastructure, especially that high-speed internet infrastructure that reaches out to rural areas. That'll enable us to really transform how our economy works. And we won't be in this cycle of having to drive to work where there's no public transit and connect to the economy in those sorts of ways. So that long-term question, I'm sorry, I'm waffling on it. It's tougher to answer, but in the short term, I really see a major investment in transformational change in how our economy is powered.
Yeah, me too. I think one thing that's missed a lot is the idea of a standard of living is there's some things that are objectively true, like everyone needs to have a roof and food. And there's some things that are, I think, not as well understood about the idea of like what actually makes people happy. And I think we can see from COVID how we've lost some things that have made us happier to a degree. And I'm not an expert, and I'm not going to get into it because you're the one answering the questions. But I think that that's something that also bears thinking about, is the fact that with the change in what we value in the economy. We can choose to preserve the things that we really care about, and we can actually bring back things that we've lost. And I'm thinking a lot about community, which I'm sure you
Yeah.
can relate to, because you had a great community on your campaign team, by the way.
Well, I totally agree. Community is so important. And that broadens out. One of the ways we created community on our campaign team is to actually eat together. We would share food.
Oh
We
yeah.
brought in 30 young Greens from across Canada. And what we said to them is, we'll give you a billet so you have a place to sleep. We'll feed you in the morning at your place of your billet. And then if you come into the campaign office, there'll be lunch and dinner there. So come into the office and campaign with us. And food is
Yeah.
a magnet. It creates a sense of community and togetherness. And local food is also critical to this transition in the economy we were talking about earlier, right? And so I totally agree. Creating a sense of community, of interdependence locally, of an economy that functions locally is all part of this transition that we need to make. And I think it'll all go to well-being. And one of the things the Greens are good at is connecting the dots between, say, local food, building the local economy, increasing the sense of well-being locally, because that creates a sense of community, right? And connecting all these dots is what we need to do. We shouldn't be going on and on about the IPCC report and what percentage of greenhouse gas reduction targets. What we should be doing is telling stories about community
Yeah.
and connecting the dots for people. That's how we're going to win seats and convince people that the Greens have really got our act together, and we're telling stories that are true stories that resonate in
Yeah.
community. Yeah.
A lot more positive to talk about
Yeah.
those kinds of things than saying the world's gonna end if we don't do anything.
I
Yeah.
totally agree. Like in our last campaign, the first two parts of our slogan, remember, not left, not right, two negatives. And I like the
Yeah.
third part of the slogan, which was forward together, but the not right, not left part of it was really unfortunate. And we need, and you've heard this, Derek, on the doorstep. I've heard this, oh, you Greens, you're the party of no, you're the party of the sky is falling, all this kind of stuff. We need to be really careful in how we communicate around this stuff. And if we're talking about community, how we build community, if we're talking about, yes, we can, the sort of Barack Obama approach, I think that the Greens will really start to resonate better with Canadians.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah, I'm going to try to not talk so much because
Oh, it's okay.
we got questions I think building up here. So there's a question from Green Voting One in the chat, and they are asking, I have heard you say candidates need to stay focused on specific topics during the election campaign. What leadership style will you use to include diverse ideas and yet still accomplish this?
Thank you, Green Party One.
Green
I love
voting.
that. That's a lovely question, because diversity is one of our core values. And I think it's essential to have diversity at all levels of our organization. And I'm one of the only candidates campaigning on a co-leadership model where you would have two leaders at the top of the party, just like the German Greens and the New Zealand Greens, and recently the Alberta Greens have adopted this. And then we should build diversity into our federal council. And I'm coming out with this Indigenous paper this week, which says we have a youth council and the two chairs of the youth council are on our federal council. Let's do the same thing with an Indigenous council. And let's look at how we can include on our federal council people who are economically marginalized, because that's a really difficult nut to crack. We need to reach out to people who are underrepresented because they can't participate due to their economic situation. And let's build this in throughout our organization so we have diversity of viewpoints everywhere, including, and this is critical, in our candidates. Our candidates, our 338 candidates, must represent the full diversity of Canada. And as leader, I'm going to make that a top priority. But let's be clear, I totally get it that as a white male, straight white male, I'm not the best person to reach out to, say, Black Lives Matter and say, we need more candidates from the Black community. Or even though I'm very committed and have a lifelong work around Indigenous justice, I wouldn't be the first person to reach out to Indigenous communities, say, I don't know more, and say, we really need more Indigenous candidates to come in and fight for Indigenous rights inside the Green Party. So what I would love to do is create a team of rivals. If you look at the other 8 candidates in this leadership race, they're fantastic people, really unbelievable qualities in these people. And let's pull together. Let's find a leader who is really good at not having to be center stage and to be the rock star in the spotlight right at the front. I am that kind of leader. My leadership style, to answer your question, is more about enabling others, helping other people to excel. And let's get these other fantastic candidates in the race leading different parts of this diversity program because they have the lived experience. What I have is the organizational talent, the understanding of deep systems change, which has been my professional career, and the understanding of dispute resolution. My title, my last two titles at the executive was Executive Director of Innovation and Executive Director of the Dispute Resolution Office at the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Attorney General here in BC. So I understand dispute resolution. I understand innovation. I've worked in it for years and years. And what I'd love to do is pull together these fantastic candidates and say, let's go to it. Let's go to it as a team. You lead. And when you want me to step up and be right next to you or behind you or even in front of you, if you say now's the time, I'll be there. But I love this idea of a team of rivals. There's a great book by that title about Abraham Lincoln and how he created the best cabinet in US history by pulling together all his rivals, his political rivals, into his cabinet. And that's my model. And that's how I'd like to lead. Great question.
That's a really cool idea, surrounding yourself with your rivals. If you
Yeah.
got nothing but yes people around you, you don't hear
That's
going wrong.
That's exactly right. We need diversity of viewpoints. It's one of the reasons the Green Party policy is always head and shoulders above other policies. We're often a little bit long-winded, too much data. We don't tell enough stories that resonate, but we have the best policy. It just can't be 100 pages long. It has to
Totally.
be. And the reason we have this best policy is we fight it out internally, especially between elections. We have such a diversity of viewpoints, and it's really healthy. And I love that about the Greens. We value diversity. It's one of our 6 core values. And as leader, I would too. But when it comes to election times, we need to be very disciplined. And that's when we need to stick to the message, stick to what the members have decided is our Green Party policy. And in the last election, I think it was a disaster. We talked about abortion for 5 or 6 days when it's really clear we're a pro-choice party. End of story, right? We talked about separatists in Quebec running for us and racists in New Brunswick who had joined us. Remember all that, Derek? We need to focus on our high moral ground, which is we're the only party with a really great plan for solving the climate emergency and getting our economy going again. We've got to be focused. Yeah. Sorry, bit of a long answer there. I'll try to keep it shorter. Yeah.
Great answer. Yeah. I'm not sure how many questions we've got built up here, but I'm just going to try to fire through them. So
okay, I'll be shorter too.
Okay. Well, don't stress about it. So Mina Lee, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That's my guess. MYNA. Mina Lee in the chat is asking or saying, I don't hear much from the leadership candidates talking about agriculture in Canada. It is in a mess. So do you have some specific solutions?
Yes, Mina Lee from Salt Spring Island. Welcome to the call. Great to hear your question. And yes, and I think what we need to do as Greens is really focus on agriculture policy and how we connect with rural Canadians. If you look at where we win as Greens, you know, Mike Schreiner won in a very much rural riding in Guelph. The PEI Greens are really connected to the agricultural community in PEI, and that's one of our strongholds. Same in New Brunswick. I ran in Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke, which is a rural urban riding, very mixed. And so I think we need to connect on this issue. And I think our issue resonates when we talk about local food being a priority, when we talk about the 100-mile diet, when we talk about helping farmers to get off this manufacturing approach to farming, especially livestock, and get into much more small scale regenerative agriculture. I think we're talking a language, especially here in BC, that many, many people in the agricultural community resonate with. When we talk about adding value and turning our agricultural products not just into something we export right away, but also into connected to the tourism business, like the wineries and the orchards in the Okanagan have done, and really add value that way. I think that resonates with British Columbians and with Canadians. So let's not be the party of no. Yes, we are against, mass-produced beef. Yes, we are for the Canada Food Guide and the requirement to reduce milk consumption in that guide. So we should stand strong for that because we know that these massive livestock operations, massive dairy farms create huge methane issues for us, huge planetary impacts. But let's also be the party of yes and saying we have a vision for where agriculture should go. And let's speak in a positive way about how we're going to help farmers to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Gotta go forward together.
Yeah.
So we got another question here about voting age. So Green Party has a policy to reduce the voting age to 16. Some people are worried that teenagers are too irresponsible and unrealistic to have that responsibility. What are your thoughts on the issue?
I totally disagree with those people. So I think, we had so many 16-year-olds, 14-year-olds on our campaign in Esquimalt, Saanich, many of them were climate strikers, and they knew more about politics than 99% of Canadians. And so even though this isn't Green Party policy, I'm keen on the idea of even allowing 14-year-olds to to write a challenge exam. If they pass a challenge exam on voting rights, and they can show they know enough about Canadian politics and Canadian history and how Canadian government works, that even 14-year-olds should be allowed to vote. Now, I realize that's not Green Party policy. Leaders don't set policy, members do, but that would be a dialogue I'd love to have. And I look at my own daughters. I have 4 daughters, and they know way, way more about politics than 90% of people who are of voting age. So our system does discriminate against young people, and by setting up a challenge exam system, which wouldn't have to be expensive, it can be entirely online, we could actually allow people who are very knowledgeable to participate. And by the way, if people learn to vote early, 16-year-olds and so on in school, they're taught in their social studies classes, you're voting next year, here's what you need to know. They get into the habit of voting young, it'll really increase our voter participation rates. And Canada's voter participation rates have been dropping through the floor. So this would be a way of solving that problem as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard that mentioned a lot of times. If you start the habit because if you think about it, you finish school and they say, well, start voting in I don't know, a couple of
Yeah.
years now.
Yeah.
Life gets in the way. You forget
Yeah.
about it.
I have heard the argument that teachers are biased and they'll tend to teach their students to vote one way or the other. But my experience with my daughters is different. If their teacher is telling them to do one thing, or if their parents are telling them to do something, they pretty much look at doing the opposite. So I'm not too worried about that. Yeah.
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 Okay, so we've got a question about healthcare here. So, and it's very, very relevant to what's going on right now because healthcare is under a provincial jurisdiction in Canada. So the federal government can have an impact on improving access to mental health services in this country. What steps can the federal government take to improve access to mental health services in Canada?
Federal government has a huge spending power impact on healthcare in Canada. And we have a Canada Health Act that legislates a framework for how that money is spent. And the federal government spends billions and billions of dollars every year on healthcare. So I think that a national mental health strategy should be part of what we're saying to the provinces is we want to make this a priority. We want to implement a national mental health strategy. And part of the money we're giving you has to go to that. And if you don't like that, that's fine. We'll find other ways to deliver. But I really think mental health, and I'm seeing this across the country, as I've across the country twice now for the leadership campaign, and mental health is a key issue that people are talking about sort of on the ground, and our politicians aren't paying close attention to in Ottawa. And I do believe the federal government can do much more on this. It's true, provinces are responsible for healthcare delivery, but if we put the right money behind it, and especially on innovation in mental health care, especially on enabling people with mental health challenges to stay home and to enable them to be taken care of in the community, it's a much, much better way than our checkerboard approach to mental health services across Canada. And in some provinces, it's really terrible. There are very, very few resources. So I do think the federal government needs to make this a spending priority and needs a clear mental health strategy with performance measures to hold provinces to account on delivering on that strategy.
Yeah, that's great. I never thought about that, having people with mental health issues be able to be treated at their own homes. Like, because if you think about it, like I've been depressed, I've gone to seek counseling, but like it's a barrier, like getting out there and finding the services.
If people could come about that terrible noise, if I just knocked over my microphone. If people could come into the mental health services through their smartphones or their home computers, some people are triggered by that, but most people aren't. And so people who can stay in a safe place and get access to these services online, it makes a total difference. They don't have to go out in public. They don't have to get on public transit. They don't have to sit around in a waiting room with a bunch of strangers. It would transform how we deliver these services. Not everybody can do that, or that work doesn't work for, maybe 10%, but for the other 90%, let's figure out how we transform the delivery of this service. My daughter is a first-year resident psychiatrist in Calgary, and she's seeing a lot of patients face-to-face, which is very stressful, especially in these COVID-19 times. And distance services in mental health is, I think, a breakthrough opportunity for us. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert. And my daughter isn't my chief advisor on how to deliver these services. But I've done this in the justice system. People said, oh, you can't deliver those services online. People will never resolve their motor vehicle accident or their condominium dispute online. And we're doing it right now. The Civil Resolution Tribunal, which I mentioned earlier, the transformational change project that I last worked on is the only part of our justice system that stayed open through COVID-19. And it's the way of the future.
Yeah.
Not everybody can use it, but for folks who can, it's deeply transformative. And we are facing more and more pandemics in the future. Let's move a lot of these services online so the 80-90% of people who can actually access them will access them. Long answer again, but I'm very passionate about improving mental health service delivery.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, my whole generation is if I can do it on my phone, I'm doing that instead.
Oh, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Why travel miles and miles?
Yeah, totally. If I could deal with ICBC right on the phone, that would be nice. So the next question we've got here is, how important is it for the federal Green Party to cooperate with provincial Green parties? And what will be your approach as a leader to that cooperation going forward? Somewhat related to the previous question.
It's hugely, hugely important. We're a small party still. Our fundraising federally and provincial is still much, much smaller than the Conservatives and the Liberals. We're catching up to the NDP, which is good. But we need to collaborate. We need to share resources much more intensively. And I've done that in my personal life. I've traveled to a campaign for Adam Olsen. I traveled and helped Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Ontario Greens. As you know, Adam Olsen's the interim leader of the BC Greens. I traveled to Memram Cook Tantramar and knocked on doors for Megan Mitton, as I mentioned earlier. She won by 11 votes. And I've been really a federal Green. I'm a member of the BC Greens, but very active federally. And I think that's an example for everybody. We need to concentrate our resources. We need to get our top campaigners out working, especially in by-elections like we did with Paul Manley. We brought crews of people up 7 weekends in a row, including 4 days on election day weekend. And that's the model. We need to concentrate resources, and that includes our federal staff. We should have no federal staff sitting in the office in Ottawa during election campaigns, especially by elections. They should be out in the field in winnable ridings, knocking on doors, coordinating volunteers, making sure our IMIT and data structures are right. We need to focus resources in a much more disciplined way. And that actually happened on Paul's campaign in the, as you know, Derek, and as Elan would know, this happened really well. And let's push it further. I've talked to Mike Schreiner about it. How can we do it in Ontario? There's already a lot of data sharing between the feds and province in Ontario. It's not happening in BC though. And we need to move, partly because BC has stricter privacy laws. Yeah. But that just requires good lawyers and good policy analysts to figure out how to make it happen. It can happen better, and we need to integrate much more. The BC Greens are worried about integrating in terms of policy. There are policy differences between the federal and provincial Greens. That's perfectly fine. Keep the policy separate, but integrate the back rooms, the technology, the data, the volunteer coordination, the phoning teams, national phoning teams into provincial ridings that are winnable. I'm helping out Naomi Hunter in Saskatchewan, our leader in Saskatchewan. She has a potential winnable riding in Regina. I'm going to be going there. If I'm elected as a leader of the Green Party on October 4th, I'm going to be going there in a week after and knocking on doors with her. I think that's the model. Let's concentrate resources and let's collaborate really closely together.
That's great. Yeah, Green Party is it's a unified. It's the only sort of international party that's in existence, right? It's and you're totally right with there's a lot of security requirements for BC, but you might be happy to know this, that there's a lot of talk, and they're planning on making this happen. The system that we've used for organizing federally, G-Vote, is going to be adopted by the provincial, the BC Greens. Obviously not taking the names and addresses and everything, but the system. So you said you're heading out to Saskatchewan, and that leads me to a question that I've got. You've been taking this trip across the country. How have you been doing that?
I've mainly been driving. I wish I could say that I was driving an electric vehicle the whole time. I'd love to. I tried to convince my wife that we should buy one, but they're
Yeah.
usually expensive. And we have a 2006 Toyota Sienna van, which can seat 8 people, which is great for campaigning. And we figured, environmentally, selling the old van and getting an electric vehicle was just not responsible, too expensive. We can't afford
Yeah.
it anyway. So
Yeah.
we've been driving a lot. And the other thing I'd say in terms of campaigning in COVID-19, we've been really, really careful about social distancing. We only have events in public parks. And it's been fantastic. I've never laughed so much on a campaign. People seem really happy and relieved to be outside in a beautiful public park. We try and get near, the play structures so people can bring their kids. And there's kids in the background, people running in and out of our meetings. People are smiling. I have never had such a positive, happy campaign. And if I'm the leader of the Green Party, we are going to be campaigning outside almost exclusively, except in Edmonton in February.
Yeah, you don't want to be there for that, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're right about at the end of the chat here. So thanks for taking the time with us tonight, Dave. It's been a pleasure seeing you as always. And we'll get a chance to talk again privately soon. But do you have any sort of closing statements that you would like to make to the voters of Nanaimo Ladysmith?
Yes, I do. And I really want to start by saying thank you to you, Derek, and Elan, and Alicia, and everybody else who's pulled this together. It really takes this kind of organization. We can tell from our cross-country campaigning where there's an organized riding. And you guys are certainly one of our 15 or 20 organized ridings. And I really appreciate you pulling this together. I offer some very unique things in this race. One is I'm from Vancouver Island. I ran in a seat that we will win next time. None of the other leadership candidates can say that. I've campaigned from Atlantic Canada to British Columbia on winning green campaigns. None of the other leadership candidates can say that. I'm perfectly bilingual. I can campaign in French or English. I can win leaders' debates in both languages. And to me, it's essential to have a leader who is ready on day one to campaign in Quebec, in New Brunswick, in Eastern Ontario, even in Saint Boniface, Manitoba, where I was 3 weeks ago, to make sure that we can really reach our full potential as a party. I offer some unusual skills. I love to listen. I'm a listener and a builder. I don't need to be center stage. I have 4 daughters and have learned that it's much better sometimes just to be quiet and let others lead. And that's the kind of leadership I offer. I'm really about listening and building. And I believe that we can transform the Green Party of Canada and win seats in the next election that we didn't expect to win if we choose the right leader. So that's what I offer. I want to create a team of rivals with all these other 8 fantastic leadership candidates. And I believe I can. In fact, I believe I'm the only person in this race who has the capacity to pull them all together and get them to run again in winnable ridings in the next election and build together. Thank you very much for all your time. My website is davidmerner.com. And there are 3 key buttons on that. One is donate. And some of you will know the maximum is $1,625. You can't donate more than that, but I would love any donation. No donation is too small. Second, volunteer. If anybody wants to get involved in a leadership campaign, we're doing a lot of phoning. Derek's an expert in running phone teams. Derek, I'd love to have you on our team. So phoning is the other, and also just outreach, media outreach. There's a ton of work. And then the third one is join the party. I'm often surprised people aren't members. You have until September 3rd to join the party and vote on the most important decision the Green Party has made in 14 years. So get your friends, family, relatives. There's 2 days left. We have a sale on. Tell them it's only $10 and get them to join because that's critical as well. Thank you, everybody, for hearing me out. Call me on my cell phone. My cell phone's on the website if you have any more questions. I'd be delighted to speak by cell phone. Thank you.
Wow, thanks for mentioning that about joining on and being a member, because nobody else has mentioned that so far. It's really, really important. I hope nobody's mentioned that before. And there's a lot of people who are surprised. I've spoken to some other candidates and they say people don't even know that a race is happening right now. So very good. Anybody, anytime anybody volunteers in any campaign, be it Dave's or anybody else's, it's helpful for the Green Party. So our EDA strongly urges anyone who's interested in any of the candidates to help out. And just so everyone knows, I say this at the end of every single video, this is being recorded right now. It's on YouTube on the link that you're watching it on YouTube. And you can send that link to your friends in case they missed it. And you can watch it again if you want to pick every word we said apart or you missed something. And As always, thanks for watching, folks. We're going to be, again, the next one actually isn't on Tuesday. It's going to be on Thursday. That'll be with Glenn Murray or I hope it's Glenn Murray. I think it's Andrew West. Sorry if I got that wrong. I think it's Andrew West, actually. Yeah. So thanks for watching. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Derek.
Awesome. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.